Soul of the Parsha with Rabbi Nir Menusi.
This class is made possible by our kind supporters over at Patreon. Thank you and enjoy the class. Shalom everyone, and welcome to the very last Soul of the Parsha class for this year, the Hebrew year of Tafshin Pei Aleph, 5781. This is the year that's ending, and we are tomorrow evening entering a new year, a new Hebrew year, a new Jewish year, the year Tafshin Pei Bet. And this class will be dedicated to the Parsha of Nitzavim that we read yesterday on Shabbos. But we're going to connect Nitzavim and Rosh Hashana, the new year, also the day in which man was created. Because as we know, the first day of the Jewish year, the Hebrew year, is the day of the creation of man. The creation of the world took place, the very first day of creation was the 25th day of Elul, according to our tradition. And that makes the first day of Tishrei that Friday, the 6th day of creation, when man was created. The second day of Rosh Hashana would be the first Shabbat. So we're going to, as we dedicated this entire year to looking at the first segment of each Parsha, so we're going to do the same today. We're going to look at the first segment of Nitzavim, and as I said, see how it connects with Rosh Hashanah. So the name of the Parsha was Nitzavim, and the first verse went the following. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokechem. You are all standing this day before the Lord your God, the leaders of your tribes, your elders, and your officers, every man of Israel. This is the very first verse. Rashi explains that this is the continuation of Moshe's speeches that make up the book of Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Torah, and this is taking place on the final day of his life. This is the final day of Moshe's life. He's gathering all the Jewish people, and he says, you are all standing this day before the Lord your God. And then he points out to there being sort of classes within the Jewish people. It's first the leaders of your tribes, and then your elders, and then your officers, and then every man of Israel. Then the following verses go into details within the Jewish people. But first we have this 4-level hierarchy. And the main image that we want to start out with is the image of standing, because this is the name of the Parsha, Nitzavim, standing tall, standing upright, standing in a sort of straightforward way. And it reflects, not only is every individual standing upright, but the fact that Moshe then goes over these classes of the leaders of the tribes and the elders and the officers and then everyone else also suggests a kind of a broader hierarchy, or a kind of, it's like the Jewish people standing up with each level in its proper place. And Rashi goes into this. He says he mentioned the most important first, and then went to the less important. So this is the topic we want to focus on today, is this notion of a hierarchy in terms of a group, there being levels, and a hierarchy within the individual, because each one is standing upright, Nitzavim, which means that he himself there's a kind of internal hierarchy of levels here within us. This notion that we are standing upright, and this is a major aspect of human existence and Jewish existence, is reflected later, a few verses later, in the continuation of the Parsha, when Moshe is saying, not only with you am I making this covenant and this oath, but with those standing here with us today before the Lord, our God, and also with those who are not here with us this day. In Hebrew, you can really hear the similarity, but also the difference. It says, Asher yeshno po imanu omed hayom, those who are with us here standing today, and ve'asher einenu po imanu hayom, those who are not with us today. So when you see it's so similar, the difference is you can really make it out immediately. It's the word standing. Those who are with us today are standing. Those who are not with us today, they're no longer standing. They're lying. They're buried in the ground. And they're buried, of course, as every person is buried, horizontally. So there's something about this image of a person, a man, standing upright, that is fundamental to this parsha and fundamental to being alive. Because again, the second verse that we read juxtaposes or compares the living and the dead, and the living are standing up, they're standing upright. So how does this connect to Rosh Hashana and to the day of creation of the world? An important verse in the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, says, Asa ha'elokim et ha'adam yashar. God has created man in an upright or straightforward or upstanding manner, yashar. Yashar means like a straight line. God has created us as a straight line, but we are sometimes avoiding this or running away from this. But they're trying to bend this straightforward arrow of existence. And the fact that they should be standing upright, they're trying to bend this and make all kinds of calculations and cheshbonot, all kinds of scheming and thinking and other ideas that pull us away or push us away from our natural state, which is the state of standing upright. So this connects the parsha, Nitzavim, standing upright, and the creation of man. God created man in an upright way. This, of course, is something very simple, very fundamental in nature. Almost all animals, almost all living creatures, whether they're swimming or crawling or walking on four or flying, they're on the whole, most of the time, in a horizontal state. And some of them are semi-upright, and that's unusual, that's unique, and they really remind us of us. Why? Because we are the epitome of the upright being. Again, there are some exceptions in nature, but on the whole, most living beings are horizontal in the way they move, in the way they rest, in the way that they are. And this makes us, this is what makes the human beings. Again, we were created on the first day of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashana. This is what Rosh Hashana is all about. It's man's birthday. We were created in a state in which we're standing upright. And the idea is, what happens when you make this transition from animals that were created on the fifth and the early part of the sixth day, and then what took place when man was born, is we have this transition from a horizontal state to a vertical state. What is the meaning of this? The meaning is ultimately that the levels of existence within us are now placed in a hierarchy. And generally speaking, we have three levels. And this is something that was pointed out by the ancients, both within Judaism and outside of Judaism, that on the whole, we are made up of three basic levels, that being the intellectual level, the emotional level, and the behavioral level. And they correspond to the head and the torso and the waist, broadly speaking. And they correspond, again, it's all symbolic organs. It's the brain, the moach, and then the heart, the liv, and then the liver, kaved. Liver here standing or symbolizing the entire area of the waist. So really, moach, liv, kaved, the brain, the heart, and the liver, they really correspond to the intellectual level, the emotive or emotional level, and to the more instinctive, survival-based, we can say, behavioral level that's based on needs and desires and instincts. And for almost all living creatures, the fact that they're horizontal means that those three levels are on the same level. They're not levels. There are three aspects, but they're on the very same level. And indeed, the emotional capacity and the intellectual capacity of animals is far less developed as it is in the human creature. So, we can definitely, in more advanced creatures, we can identify an emotional, inner sphere. And as they become more advanced, like chimpanzees and some other animals, you can see some intelligence there also. But for us, our capacity for feeling and being empathetic and displaying emotions, and even more, being a cognitive, conscious, communicative animal, far exceeds any other animal. And this is is symbolized or is made manifest also by the fact that we are standing upright, that it's not on one level. The level of the waist, of the appetites, of being hungry and having desires is the lowest level. And then the emotional level is above that. And then the intellectual level is further above that. And we can say that also mankind has added to this by putting on clothes, which have symbolic meanings, and they usually symbolize something that's greater than the individual, that has to do with levels of meaning and levels of spiritual cognition that we are capable of. And it's you can see it more than in just clothes. You can see it in the fact that almost all cultures, definitely all religious cultures, traditional cultures, any cultures with any kind of affinity to something that's beyond just the physical world, would also have some kind of hat. And the hat adds maybe like a fourth level, something that's above just standing upright. The fact that we're standing upright is demonstrated by the fact that we strive to stand even further upright, to make ourselves higher than the way we are. And we do this by putting on some sort of head covering or hat. Every position of power throughout the world had a certain something resembling a crown. So a king obviously has a crown, and a minister for some religion, anyone who has an official purpose, an official idea. And up until the 50s, every person who had some basic sense of self-respect or dignity would wear a top hat, both women and men. And this is, of course, this goes together very much with the idea that on the day that we were created as this upright being, we are coronating the king, right? This is the purpose of Rosh Hashana, the first day of the year in the Jewish calendar. The purpose of everything that Rosh Hashana is all about is Hamlachat Hashem, coronating, crowning the king, God, making him our own king. So this reflects in the fact that we are able to put a crown on top of our own heads. This could be a symbol of human pride or human arrogance, but it could also be something that points out to us having an additional level to our own being that's not something that's just physical, and we want to make it manifest. The fact that we have something like a soul root or something above our heads or something that gives us spiritual blessing from above us. So this is the essence of hierarchy. Today, in today's world, in today's culture, hierarchy is very much opposed. There is something very fundamental about modernity and modern culture, secular culture, that is trying very much, very, very hard to fight the concept of a hierarchy. And politically, of course, this goes along with the idea of rebelling against monarchies and the idea of a class society, having something like nobility. All this is very much shunned, and of course the most important event is the French Revolution. French Revolution, it was the people rebelling against the monarchy and the class system and trying to create a republic, a democratic republic, which is all about equality. So that's on the political level, but it's also on a cultural and a psychological level. On the cultural level, everything that has to do with modern art is about shaking up the ladder of so-called high art and low art. Even the fact that I just had to say so-called is a product of modern thinking, which says, who says that what was considered high art is really high art? Maybe it's low art, and maybe something very low and simple could be high art. The most famous example is the French artist Marcel Duchamp putting a urinal in a museum early in the 20th century and making an artistic statement with this urinal. And the statement was, let's radically rethink everything that has to do with high art versus low art. I can take the lowest thing in existence, which is a urinal, which is the waste of our body goes into that. So it's even lower than our waist in a way. It's what contains our waste. It's the vessel for our waste. And I'm going to put it in what is considered a place of high art in a museum. And later on, it was reflected with the idea of pop art, and almost every branch of art in the 20th century, with some exceptions, was about shaking up or rethinking the concept of a hierarchy. And pop art was taking comic book pictures and putting them with big frames in a big museum. And in poetry, it could be someone, instead of writing high poetry, using slang language, or using even a language that's grammatically wrong as people speak in the street, and turning that into poetry. And so it's political, and it's cultural, and it's also psychological. Psychological means the flattening of the hierarchy. And the psychological level is saying something like, there is no advantage, there is no intrinsic advantage to my intellectual level, my capacity for learning and speaking and talking and expressing complex ideas and abstracting ideas and so on. There's no radical difference between that and doing something that's totally intuitive and emotional, and just improvising something or speaking directly from my heart, and also just plain gut feelings. The idea that we would say that one level is higher than the other level is considered sort of anathema to the modernist. He would say, "Who says so?" And I want to question this, all hierarchies, by saying that it's all equal, and whatever is authentic for you, whatever is part of you, becomes your authentic expression, and just express yourself. Whatever it is, you can express yourself. And then, for example, let's talk about three genres or three types of music that are obviously, very clearly, extremely different from one another. And not only that, but they very clearly come from different levels within us. But the fact is that the modernist would say, the postmodernist even more so, postmodernism isn't really something that's different from modernism. Someone once said that postmodernism is really most modernism. It's just an extreme expression of modernism itself, which is rebelling against all systems of meaning that are traditional. So the modernist or post or most modernists would say that, for example, you take classical music. Classical music is very intellectual. It's very complex. It has sometimes mathematical structures within it, and it takes a long time to study and to compose. And great classical, composers put in a lot of intellectual effort into writing what they did. So you take that on the one hand, and then you take, let's say, jazz music. And jazz music is something that's very, very intuitive, improvised, and you just go with the flow of your intuitions from one moment to the other. You don't plan or compose. And then going even to another level would be something like a music that's only based on rhythm and not melody, with the most extreme case being something like techno music or trance music in dancing clubs, that is all about rhythms. It's just one rhythm after the other, interplaying with one another. And now these three types of music, there are many more, of course, but these three symbolic types, they clearly come from the three levels that we mentioned before, with classical music coming from the more from the intellect or the head, and then jazz music is more expressive of the heart, and then techno music, which is really just a new incarnation of the most primitive, drum beating, which is all about the most simple societies. They're all about dancing in circles around the fire, and it's just rhythm. And techno is just an electronic drum. That's what it is. It's an electronic drum for people who want to go back to that level in the evolution of civilization, the level of just dancing around the campfire. Even the name trance music is about entering a trance, meaning that you don't want to think and you don't want to feel. You just want to have those guttural, gut feelings that are just rhythmic in nature. So again, those three types of music come from the three levels. Classical music is more intellectual, and jazz music is more emotional, and techno or trance music is more from the level of the gut or the liver or the waist. And yet, it would be difficult to find someone who would outright say that one type of music is higher or more advanced than another type of music, because then you risk being, judgmental, and saying that maybe one culture is superior to another culture. And this is the biggest trauma of modern man or postmodern man, is that they don't want to be colonial or arrogant or to have, it's all multicultural. You have to be one above the other. But the thing is, it's not just cultural, it's psychological too. Because once we say it's all equal, then we treat our own levels as equal. And really what we're doing is we're going against the fundamental aspects of our creation, which is God has created man standing upright, with the head above the heart and the heart above the liver, and those three levels as a hierarchy. By equalizing everything, by flattening everything, then, it's like, flatline is when you die. And flatlining everything is going back to nature, going back to, like animals, that for the animals, it's all on the same level. And this is hard to hear, but this is, we have to acknowledge this. I remember as a teenager, growing up in a very secular society, and I had this conversation with someone who I very much appreciated. He was an adult man, a friend of my parents, but always spoke to me as an adult, which is something I really appreciated. It's hard to find sometimes people that would treat you as an adult, even though you're like 13 or 14, I was at the time. And we had a lot of interesting conversations. And then one time I remember we spoke about, disco music or music that you have in dance clubs. And then he said something that astonished me in the courage that he had to say something that goes against the grain of modern thinking so much, and completely unpolitically correct. And it was precious. It annoyed me at first, but then I really had to think about it later on. He said, this kind of music is the epitome of decadence. It says all human civilization has strived for millennia to rise above the simple tribal drums that are just rhythmic in nature, and to create gradually a melodious music, a music that's about melody, that's sophisticated, that takes you from one place and leads you to another place. Civilization is all about evolving from those drums to a civilization of listening to melody. And that melody is something sophisticated, something high that generates meaning or taps into meaning and leads you from one place to another place, a higher place. And it shocked me, but it made an incredible influence on me, because I then realized it's possible to look at culture not just as saying, well, this is interesting in another way, and it's all interesting and different, and it's all equal. It's not necessarily equal. There are things that emerge and evoke a higher level within us, and there are things that emerge from and evoke a lower level within us. And this could sound very, very simple, but for me, someone growing up in this culture was an immense chidush. It was something new to hear. And so the fact is that today's culture is sort of leading us, pushing us to go against our nature as upright creatures and sort of just lie down, rest, and regard everything as equal on the same level. And it reflects psychologically within us that we sometimes find it hard to point out that there are levels within us and that some are higher than the others. I should add to this several things now. So in case you didn't guess by now, or you don't know this, the three organs that I mentioned, right? Moach, lev, kaved, brain, heart, liver. It's not just those names. These are the traditional names, not just in Judaism. But in Hebrew, when you write it down, moach, lev, kaved, and you look at the acronym is melech. Melech is king. It's also the root of the verb to rule, to reside over something. So we are kingly by virtue of putting our head first, and then our heart, and then our livers, moach, lev, kaved, with the head governing, ruling over the heart, and the heart ruling over the liver. And this makes us stand upright. And then we, as I said before, we go beyond it, and we add a crown to our heads, a head covering, in order to display or illustrate the fact that we are able to grasp something that's above us also. And so this is the deep connection between the day of the creation of man and the day of the coronation of God. We coronate the king, that is, we accept him as our king, we accept God as our king, on the first day of the year, in Rosh Hashana, by standing upright and reminding ourselves that we have these levels. Now we should add a caveat. The caveat is that in Chassidut, the upper two levels, the head and the heart, there's a little interplay there. Because in Chassidut, a fourth level, which really goes along with the image of the crown, is added. And that is called Pnimiyut Halev, the inner dimension of the heart, or the inner essence of the heart, is higher than the intellect. And basically the idea is that the liver or the waist or the behavioral level is always the lowest. But then you have the emotional level and the intellectual level. And the intellectual level should be above the emotional, right? The emotions are nearsighted and very heated, and they don't necessarily have good foresight or good planning and not necessarily work in our own favor. And we should have the intellect be above the emotions. But there is a fourth level, which is called the inner essence of the heart, where it all flips. The inner level of the heart is above the intellect. It's above the head. And that sees even further than what the intellect sees. The brain, the head, the intellect is able to see only so far. But if you're able to differentiate between the external aspect of your emotions and the internal aspect of your emotions, the internal aspect of your emotions is higher than the intellect. And this is the place of spiritual intuitions and of also being, a super rational faith in God has to do with the inner essence of the heart. So the fact we have this interplay is reflected in the fact that in the first generations of mankind in the Torah, we had two people who were called Lemech. Lemech is the same letter as Melech, but this time the heart comes before the head. Lemech, Lamed Mem, Chaf. So it's the heart first, and then the head, and then the waist. So now, interestingly, those two Lemechs, one of them was wicked, and one of them was righteous. One of them was wicked. He was the one who had two wives, and one that he would have, not give birth and to remain beautiful, and the other one he would have, bear all the babies, and he was also he killed Cain. He was the murderer. Now the first one, Cain was the first one. He murdered him, and he was a wicked man. But the other Lemech was a very righteous man. He gave birth to Noah. He was the father of Noah, so he had such a righteous son. He must have been righteous himself. And the idea is that the two Lemechs correspond the two ways in which the heart can rule over the head. The wicked Lemech, it was the actual heart ruling over the head. That's very negative. That flips the hierarchy upside down. By the way, his daughter of the wicked Lemech, his daughter was Naamah. Naamah ended up doing tshuva and marrying Noach. The two Lemech's children married each other. But before she did tshuva, before she turned to the light side, to the good side, she was a drummer for rituals of idolatry, which tells us that if the heart is above the head, ultimately the liver would be above all of them as well. And she was a drummer. We spoke about the drums and the techno, the electronic drums, the drums for the rites of idolatry. That's what she did. She ended up again turning to the good side and marrying Noach. But Noach was the son of the good Lemech, and the good Lemech means that for him the same acronym, same letters, Lamed Mem Chaf, it was the higher inner essence of the heart ruling over the head. He didn't have a wicked son that had to turn good. He had a good son, a righteous son to begin with, Noach. Okay, so that was just a side note. But the main point of this class is that we have all these levels. Now the thing is, everything in the world has a positive source. There is also a positive holy source for the idea that all the levels are equal. Although I just said that equalizing the levels is like returning to our animal state, returning to nature in a very negative way of saying it's all equal, right? Nature it's like circular. There's no high or low. It's all equal. And although, despite all of this, there is something about the idea of trying to find a good quality, a good property in everything in the world, whether it's classical music. By the way, with the levels of music, instead of we talk about techno and then jazz and then classical music, what would be the fourth level that corresponds to the inner dimension of the heart? That would be something like Hasidic soul music, a Hasidic nigun, a spiritual nigun is not intellectual. It's not as sophisticated as, let's say Bach, but it's far more simple. It's more emotional, but it's not like jazz. It comes from the inner essence of the heart. It's something far deeper, and it's all about longing and remembering God. So anyway, the idea that it's all equal has something to it. It's not all hierarchies. What does it have to it? There is an aspect of godliness that's called the light that surrounds all the worlds. The surrounding light means it's equally, not just omnipresent, it's equally present in everything. It's present in the highest and the lowest aspects of creation equally. Everything is divine. He created everything. He wanted to create everything. Everything serves some divine purpose, and therefore it's all equally divine. This is the true root of modernity and postmodernity, is that they're trying to tap into the surrounding lights of God. They don't know this, they don't acknowledge this. It's subconscious or superconscious for them, but that is truly what's happening. They're rebelling against, when the modernity, secularism, rebelled against the hierarchy of religion and tradition. Really, on the deepest level, what they rejected was the idea that God is can only be experienced via hierarchies. By saying he's in the higher, loftier, more spiritual places, he's not in the lower, more mundane places. And the truth is that they're right. God is truly everywhere, equally everywhere, in terms of his surrounding light. So the deep, deep motivation of modernity and secularism is trying to reveal and experience God's surrounding light as it permeates all of existence equally. But here is the rub. Here is the catch. There are two ways of equalizing everything. We can equalize everything in a way that goes downwards, and we can equalize everything in a way that goes upwards. It's like looking for the lowest common denominator versus looking for the highest common denominator. There's something about modernity by saying that a urinal is as high an art form as a painting by Van Gogh or Rembrandt, and by saying that simple slang words are as lofty as the highest language of poetry. And by saying that techno music is just as valid a form of artistic expression as classical music, really what it ends up being is that it all goes down to the level of the urinal and the tribal drum. It all goes downwards. It's really saying we're all equal because we're all living and breathing and eating and excreting. And this is equalizing everything in a way that doesn't elevate us. It pulls us down. And this is negative equality. This is not connecting to God's surrounding lights. God's surrounding light is like a circle that surrounds the universe. And it's different. It's higher. It's bigger than the circle of nature and living in a physical world. It's like two circles, one within the other. And if we want to truly experience God's surrounding light, we first need to connect to God's, this is another kind of light. It's called the Memalekol, the light that fills all the worlds. And this is the vertical line light. This is a light that has to do with a hierarchy. Now, we can't experience it so much here, but if we strive higher and we rebel against our own lowly nature, and we're trying to constantly strive to climb higher and work up higher, up the ladder of being, the chain of being. And as we rise up, we're able to appreciate subtler and finer and higher, more divine lights and levels of meaning and levels of devotion to God. And so as we go up, we need this type of linear hierarchical structure of experiencing the world in order to connect to the higher surrounding lights of God. So going back to the creation of man and the creation of the world and Rosh Hashana and coronating God, the world today is trying to lure us all into a state of a flatland, a flat line, a state of saying everything is equal, which is really like saying everything is dead. Because if the heart and the head and the liver, it's all on the same level, then we are no better than animals. We are no better than the lowest of people, and everything disintegrates in a way. The most complex and highest and most spiritual work of art, or a verse in the Torah, anything that's high, is equated with the lowest of things in the world. So this is what the world is luring us into. And in a way, this is not just the world, it's life itself. There's something about life that wears us down. Life tries to slowly kill us. That's what life is all about. It slowly is killing us. It's killing us softly. And come Rosh Hashana, come the first day of the year, we need to stand upright. And we need to renew and reinvigorate this desire within us not to succumb to this kind of, lulling temptation of equalizing everything. We want to stand upright, Nitzavim kulchem hayom, place our head over our heart and our heart over our waists, and the inner dimension of our heart, our spiritual intuitions, our faithfulness to God above everything else, and we want to stand upright and say we are not succumbing to this. We are coronating by having this inner coronation of moach lev kaved, ekroni melech. It all points to the most transcendent of being, the king of all kings. And we're saying we want you to be our king, and we want to be resolute in this decision. This is another verse in the parasha of Nitzavim, is uvacharta b'chaim, choose life. You can choose both life and death, both blessing and curses, both goodness and good and evil. And it's all equally present for you as options. But I urge you to choose life and choose goodness and choose blessings. And the word choose, the word to choose in Hebrew, livchor, if you change the letters, you have the word which is called bariach. Bariach is like an axis. This is the vertical axis, which is the axis of displaying our capability of choosing the higher over the lower, literally over the lower, standing upright and not succumbing to this and saying, yes, you can equalize everything, world, oh world, and you can try via entropy and via cultural entropy or cultural decadence. You can try and pull me down and push me down, but I will not succumb to this. I will not surrender to this. I am going to stand upright and place my head over my heart and my heart over my liver and my soul over everything else. And this is how I coronate myself and how I coronate the king. And we should constantly be making this resolution to strive to lead a meaningful, high, lofty spiritual life. And by virtue of that, we can then go on to see that God is truly present in all of our levels. We're not putting down any level. By putting it lower on a hierarchy does not mean putting it down. It means putting it in its proper, good place, the place where it should be. And once we tap into the higher surrounding light, we can then truly see it as omnipresent, equally omnipresent, and experience how every aspect of our being, every level of the hierarchy of our being it receives its place as serving God, experiencing God, and displaying godliness to the entire world. So I wish you all a very, very happy and sweet new year. a year of new resolutions and new decisions, and a year of fighting against gravity and standing upright and striving for higher and better purposes, and striving to be the best person you can possibly be, and not accepting any kind of temptation to be tired and sleep and let go and give up on your destiny and your calling. And this is truly coronating your own soul and coronating God. Shana Tova Mituka. Hi, if you enjoyed this class, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, also make sure to click the bell icon. To keep the classes flowing and free of charge, please consider supporting us on Patreon, an amazing platform for supporting independent creators. You're also welcome to join our weekly live Zoom class. Thank you very much, keep healthy, and see you soon.